Hello, this is Signals from the Hill, a podcast about comics from Avery Hill Publishing. I'm Ricky Miller, co-publisher at Avery Hill. In this episode, we have a conversation with celebrated comics and children's book author Lizzy Stewart as we celebrate the release of the paperback edition of her book Walking Distance. Lizzy Stewart is an illustrator and author currently based in London. Her 2017 picture book, There's a Tiger in the Garden, won the Waterstones Children's Book Prize and World Illustration Award. With Avery Hill, she published her memoir Walking Distance and collaborated with playwright Molly Naylor on the book Lights, Planets, People. Her highly acclaimed graphic novel Allison was published in July 2022. She teaches illustration at Goldsmith University and has also taught courses at the Tate and on behalf of the National Portrait Gallery. I discuss with Lizzy the arts and media that have influenced her and fed into her work. Here it is. So, Lizzy, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you.
Good,
Yeah,
good.
good.
Where are you at the moment? Where are you based?
I'm in my living room in Elephant Castle.
Okay. Do you want to, just for people who don't live in London and don't know Elephant and Castle,
Ah,
do you want to describe the area, tell them a bit about your
well,
neighbourhood?
I say Elephant Castle. We actually live sort of the bottom end of Bermondsey,
Right.
near the Old Kent Road, so the brown section of the Monopoly board, South London.
The good
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, the most exciting, where all the bargains happen. Yeah, it's quite sunny. I'm looking out the window into the garden, which has been decimated by snails this week. So I'm really excited that the sun's be roasting some of those snails.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, we've
A real.
we've got a graveyard over our back garden wall, and that's where the
Mhm.
snails go, basically. Like
Right,
yeah, in a very
for the
humane
bodies.
way, very humane way. Yeah,
Oh,
they
right.
come
Yeah, yeah,
back,
yeah,
they come back, but yeah, we no, I mean we throw
yeah,
them over there basically.
yeah.
So
Right.
yeah,
Okay, I thought you were suggesting
no,
they were being
they're
drawn
not
to the
corpse
graveyard,
eating
but they're
snails.
being directed there
I mean,
pointedly by you.
if you want the idea of corpse eating snails for your next book, then you're welcome to take it.
It's not. It's not classic Lizzy Stewart. But we all need to change now and again.
Well,
So why
exactly.
not?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Just bear in mind. Bear in mind.
My
Um,
readers will be like, she's taken an unexpected turn.
define expectations.
Mm.
So we've recently released a paperback version of the book you did with us, Walking Distance. Could you tell everyone a bit about it and why you made it?
Um, could I tell that's interesting because that is some years ago.
It
So it
is.
involves
Yeah.
revisiting even just, I mean, revisiting your pre-pandemic self is a bit of a shocker. So Walking Distance is a sort of visual essay. Some of it is kind of paneled illustrations, some of it's full page illustrations, in which I'm sort of talking about walking, the experience of walking as a woman. I think I was about 31 when I wrote it. So walking as a woman in your early 30s, also taking in kind of images of women walking from cinema, just the feeling of being a person in the world, engaging with like uh, trying to break out of your interior thoughts or your interior life as best as you can. Yeah, why did I make it? I think I made it as a challenge to myself. I'd made a few short comics. Um, I so like kind of small press things that I'd sold myself, and I wanted to kind of test myself on the writing front, and the illustration front, although I've been working as an illustrator for some time, so I sort of more felt more qualified. I think it felt like a big statement at the time to be like, I can write this thing that isn't straightforward comic. Yeah, so it was sort of a little dare to myself to write a longer form thing, something a bit experimental, something that sort of tested what I thought I could do, but also tested what I thought a comic or an illustrated book could be.
Yeah, I mean, you'd worked on some children's books previously, hadn't you? Which you've written. And I guess, like, obviously those were marrying text with pictures in a similar way to Walking Distance, I guess, where it's more illustrations with text, which you then kind of take to another level with Alison, which is
Mm-hmm.
your most recent success. Do you see that kind of path, that progression that led to Alison in those things?
Oh yeah, I mean, probably less the children. I mean, not the children's books, because I think I was going to say the children's books feel less a part of the path to Alison, but actually, um, that process of thinking about what's an image and what's drawn, what's an image and what's drawn, what's an image and what's words, which part of my brain am I using to tell this part of the story? What will best explain how should feel? That exists in children's books as much as it exists for me in kind of graphic novels. But Walking Distance was definitely like a precursor to Alison, even though they're different in some ways, although there are some things that crop up in both. Yeah, I think Walking Distance was definitely like the testing ground for doing something for adults. I think you like feeling qualified to do things is obviously like a thing that we talk about a lot. We talk about imposter syndrome, you know, feeling like you have the right to try something out. There's that phrase that I think maybe deters lots of people, like not wanting to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. Like, you're really encouraged to focus on one thing, get good at this one thing. Particularly as an illustrator, there's a pressure that I know my students feel, like to have a style, to be recognizable, to have a brand, which I sort of detest, but that so breaking out of that and trying something out and trying to work out, could I be this other thing? Could it not really be definable? Could it be sort of a bit like a comic, sort of like a graphic novel, sort of like a picture book, but be for adults? Yeah, those Alison definitely comes out of Walking Distance in quite a neat line. It was literally, I finished Walking Distance. It came out in 2019,
Maybe.
maybe.
I can't remember either.
It was like
Yeah,
a
maybe
maybe.
maybe 2018,
Yeah,
2019. Yeah.
20, yeah. So, and I started writing Alison. Well, the sort of idea was percolating at the end of 2019, and I started in in the lockdown. Um, yeah, so they're very linked. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. And then obviously with Alison, you bring in comic strips as well. So it's kind of that merger of text,
Mhm,
images, and actual comics, sequential
mhm.
comics.
Yeah.
And which is a beautiful gateway for people who don't read comics really. It's like, oh, it's a book. Oh, and there's comics bits in it as well. And which I'm sure is part of the reason why it kind of broke through. Is that
Mhm.
something you're pursuing again in what you're working on next, or is it
Yeah, I think
entirely
it.
yeah?
No, I think it'll be more more of the same kind of comics for people who are still testing the waters.
Mm,
Because I remember being that person, and
sure.
also to an extent, my reading habits still skew much more towards narrative fiction in prose format than graphic novels on a day-to-day basis. So I am writing for me, for people who read like me. Um, but I draw, so it would be mad to not use that tool, um, that I think makes a book suddenly feel like rich and delicious and exciting and special. So yeah, the new book, which I'm plodding slowly through drawing at the moment, is yeah, definitely a continuation, but hopefully feels different. I don't know. Really in the nightmare ebb of it, it goes in peaks and troughs of like, I'm a genius, I'm terrible. And then really in the, oh God, I think this might be a really boring book kind of trough at the moment. But
Um,
next week I'll be a genius.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So yeah, look forward to next week. Um, so we're going to look at how different cultural things. I can't really decide what to call this stuff. I stuck with things just because I'm not entirely sure what are they. What are they?
Yeah.
What is a cultural thing? If you
Mm.
come up with, yeah, I mean, you're a wordsmith. If you come up with a good word, let me know on that. Have influenced your and how they've influenced your work. And I ask you for a film, a song, a book, a comic, and a TV show. And so not necessarily your favorites, but ones where they've kind of welded the way into how you think and what you do and how you express your art. Um,
Mhm.
and the idea is that we talk about them and look at how they have influenced your work and maybe what they say about your work. How easy did you find it to come up with this list, Lizzy?
Yeah, I find this stuff so difficult, um, particularly in relation to my work, because a lot of the time, the things that you actually um, find it have ended up being influences on your work are like really strange,
Yeah.
very odd, kind of snatches of dialogue that you've heard, you know, on the bus or whatever, or moments in films that you didn't really like. I think
Hmm.
so. A bit of backstage gossip is that I live with O&D Pomeroy, also of the Avery Hill stable. I know, shocking. Ricky is surprised. Um, and often we'll be watching a film. I mean, a lot of the time it will be films that Owen watched when he was a teenager, and he'll be like, "Oh, this was a massive influence on Victory Point or on The Hard Switch," and it'll be a. He says it so often, and it's because you're grabbing stuff all the time and you don't know you're doing it. So although I enjoy making fun of the sheer volume of like crap films that claims to have been influenced by, um, I know that it's true that like the stuff that you're absorbing is like unconsciously and consciously is so wide ranging. And there was a BBC series called The Hour with Ben Whishaw and Ramona Garai and Dominic West that was on, I don't know, 10 years ago. And it just popped up on Netflix. And it's kind of set in the 60s in on a news program. And I remembered kind of vaguely enjoying it. And when I rewatched some of it this week, I was, oh, yeah, maybe that influenced that relationship that I've wrote in actually the thing that I'm just writing. Um, and I would never, there was no way that you would interview me and be like, well, what are your influences? And I would say BBC's The Hour from 2009. That would be ridiculous, but it is that stuff. And so actually picking out stuff that is respectable and also influential was quite tricky.
Yeah, I think it's just as a writer, you just kind of pick up. There'll be little things that happen, and it just sparks your brain going somewhere else.
Mm.
Maybe it's even better in programs that you're not really enjoying that much
Yeah,
because you're like, oh, I'm going to start thinking about this now, and go there and go, oh
yeah,
wow, what if that happened, or they did that, or if they were in
yeah,
this situation. It's
yeah.
yeah,
We talk about that a lot. Like we we both end up slogging through like TV series that we're not enjoying, but finding it quite useful
yeah.
as an exercise. Not that we're doing kind of academic writing exercises at home or anything, but like how would I fix this? What would solve this problem? How would you change this and make it better? Yeah. So often crap crap TV is much better, much more useful than the good stuff.
Um, when you're working, do you watch TV or listen to music or podcasts or anything, or any part of the
Music,
process? Or, yeah.
yeah, mostly music. Occasionally I'll watch a film if I'm doing like a very boring, repetitive task, but not really. Um, and then occasionally I'll do an audiobook if I know that I want 6 hours to pass of me just colouring something in or whatever. So I do like an audiobook sometimes when I'm working. I just listened to the new Miranda July, All Fours, which was very intense. And now there'll be a section of my book that I will always associate with that, listening to that. And it's a very intense emotional responses, whilst also trying to colour the lines.
So we're going to go through each of your choices. As you've just mentioned, books. Let's do the book first.
Oh my God,
Yeah, would you like
starting
to?
big.
Yeah. Let's go in. Let's go in. Mainly because I've just recently been reading it in prep for
Yeah.
this, so it's fresh. Uh, yeah. So yeah, tell us about which book it
Okay.
is.
So I chose The Years by Annie Ernaux, which is, I guess, a memoir, although written in plural. So instead of writing I, she's writing we. It's kind of a history of France from the 1930s, 40s through to 2006, I think. But told through the life of one woman who is ostensibly Annie Ernaux, but is also every woman in some respects. It's domestic, it's political, it's told in fragments of kind of memory, but also through descriptions of photographs, of scenes in films. It's a big, dense book, and I read it after I wrote Alison. And thank God, because I do, do think it might have really thrown me off if I'd read it before. But um, it was sort of this reading it was sort of quite a breathless experience for me, of just like, oh my God, it's this. This is the pinnacle of if I could ever achieve a fraction of one page of this book, I would be happy with myself. But you read some, you were reading it this week.
Yeah. I've only read like the first quarter or something, but I kind of
I mean, it's dense.
yeah yeah. It's a lot. Yeah, I was reading something very readable before this, so
Mhm.
yeah, and it's beautiful and yeah, I kind of it's that yeah the use of just kind of very big topics, but told in a way more about how they discuss them and things like so. They'll kind of mention the Holocaust, but just how it's not really mentioned and how people do
Mhm.
treat these things conversationally and just kind of hints of what's going on at the time just through mention how they
Mhm.
internalized it and how they dealt with it there and yeah the definitely the use of different forms of media and stuff is really interesting as well and it yeah it kind of made me think a lot of kind of more almost like if this was a Lizzy Stewart book, this it's like this would be an image, this would be
Mhm.
text. It's there's a lot of stuff there where you say, okay, that could be a drawing,
Mhm.
rather than it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be prose. It's could very
yeah,
easily. It's a picture she's painting, I guess.
yeah. It is a picture she's painting. It's a lot of images, and the writing. So yeah, as you're saying, she's sort of history, political events. They seep into it, but in the way that they seep into anyone's life. We talked about this. We didn't talk about this. We um, bought these hats because we'd seen them on this character in a film or whatever it is.
Yeah, and then
And it
there's
is
no omniscient narrator on top of it, is there? There's no like, oh,
no,
this is what the Holocaust was, or whatever. I mean, obviously that's a
yeah,
terrible example, but just it's just you know what you know from what they're saying. Essentially, that's all you need to know, I guess.
yeah. I just the end particularly, I kind of the final few pages of the book literally took my breath away, and I think like moved me so much. I was definitely sobbing by the end. Just because she is trying in the way that she sees fit at that point in time to record literally what it feels like to be alive, for her, and by being specific, by writing it about her, the world that she lives in and the things that she's experienced, the specific specificity of that then expands into something like incredibly relatable and universal. Because no, maybe you didn't have children at this age in this part of France, but maybe you recognize something in a response she had. Yeah, I don't know. It's so clever. It's so clever. She's very clever. She's literally won the Nobel Prize. She is a staggering writer. And I yeah, she's written a lot of very short books that are available through Fitzcarraldo here in the UK, and I'd recommend picking up basically any of them for like an hour of quite fascinating reading. She's very plain, very matter of fact in the way that she describes things, but very, I think she gets referred to as kind of fearless and brave quite a lot in her writing. And I think she just really drills down into the truth of what something feels like. She's written about her own kind of affairs and kind of sexual obsession and stuff in a way that she just doesn't rest on the cliche version of the feeling. She's definitely sat with her experiences and thought, no, what was that feeling actually? What did I actually say? What did I actually do? And so it reads very honestly and it's like very thrilling to read. I find, and yeah, I think The Years for me is my favorite and is the book that I think about most often in terms of what I would be trying to not emulate, but like, yeah, what I'm sort of reaching at, but like the classiest version. It's like the classiest version of it.
And so I assume it's your latest book that you feel like this is the one that's kind of drawing on it a little. Is that structurally
No,
or just
no,
no?
it's got nothing to do with it, I don't think. I think probably Alison in terms of like, yeah, choosing different ways of telling a story, whether it's paneled images or prose or replica of a photograph or a shopping list or whatever. I think that obviously I hadn't read The Years, but when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, this is that. This is how you explain what a life is not a series of grand dramatic scenes, but this kind of detritus, these little bits, these little moments, little images. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna find what's this, what did she say? So I'm gonna read like two sentences.
Sure.
I think what matters to her, on the contrary, is to seize this time that comprises her life on earth at a given period, the time that has coursed through her, the world she has recorded merely by living. And so that's right at the end of the book. But that feeling was what I was trying to do with Alison, was what did the world feel like to this woman? What has she recorded? What has she retained through the act of living? And I think that's always what I'm going to be trying to do. There's a quote from Miranda July, which I mentioned earlier, the filmmaker and artist, that I remember reading, but I'm not going to remember the exact sentence, but I remember reading when I was about 20, being like, oh my gosh, this is it. And she said something like, all I want to know is how you move through the world, what it feels like to be in your body or something, in someone else's body. Like that's all I ever want as a writer and an illustrator, an artist, I suppose, is to like to work out what life feels like for me and for other people. And I think Annie Ernaux is like prime prime example.
Cool. Let's talk now. Let's do the film. Let's go
Yeah,
somewhere
okay.
else.
So I think I said broadcast news.
You did, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Which is the film from, is it 87 broadcast news? Can't remember.
I think it's earlier,
Let me
isn't it?
have
So
is it 87? Yes, 87.
oh, okay.
Year I was born. Okay. Um, so it's a film from 1987 with Holly Hunter, Albert Brooks, and John. No,
William Hurt.
Hurt. William Hurt. Not John Hurt. William Hurt.
Yeah.
Very different. Um, and it's again, oh my gosh, set in a newsroom. So it's all related. We're looping back to the hour. Everything's interconnected. Um, yeah, about journalists telling the news. There's some interpersonal drama. It sort of doesn't amount to that much. You've seen broadcast news.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Broadcast news is one of those films that I would put on that I basically always want to watch. I always want to watch broadcast news. Um, Great performances, interesting. There's some really smart stuff in there about integrity and journalism and the truth and storytelling. But there's also some some fun interpersonal stuff. Who's she gonna date? Is it sort of ambitious but maybe morally so-so William Hurt, or is it schlubby, slightly irritating but ultimately noble uh, Albert Brooks? Um, the answer is neither. That's a spoiler. You meant to say spoiler before, aren't you? Um,
I'll do that in the intro. Don't worry.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna ruin everything. I read the last line of the book. Just spoiling the ending of everything. Um, and I don't know what relationship it bears on my own work, except that whenever I see Holly Hunter crying, she cries a lot in the film, sort of slightly inexplicably, out of nowhere, she's just sobbing. And I remember, I think I first saw it when I was about 20, and then watched it periodically through my 20s. I've not seen it for a good 5 or 6 years, but I will see it again. That crying just felt really completely accurate, speaking as a crier, but also just like what a move to put that in the film, that she just, and it's kind of funny that she breaks into sobs, but it is also just quite wretched crying. Um, yeah, something in that I really responded to, and then all the other stuff is fun and interesting. And I like a story that really doesn't amount to much, except that you've like entered a character's life, found out what it felt like at that moment, and then left again. What do you feel about broadcast news?
Um, yes, I like it a
Nothing.
lot. No, no, I do. I guess it's a nice place to hang out. It's one of those films where
Yeah.
you go, yeah, everyone's just like a lovely person, really. Even
Mm.
William Hurt is not like terrible, is he? He's just
No,
like
he's not bad.
he's a good guy. He's just like probably a bit more realistic.
Yeah.
Just
And if anything, Albert Brooks comes out of it. I think there's a couple of things that he said that are a bit like now. You're like,
yeah,
oh,
it's a
that's
bit
a bit,
meaner. It's a bit yeah.
oh,
It's like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's a good time. It's everyone's, yeah, it's just one of those very pleasant film. Very, I mean, Brooks, I think he wrote it, didn't he? And he's a very intelligent guy who writes very good dialogue. So yeah, no, I do like it a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, it's one of those good films that you just go,
Good
okay,
film.
there's nothing that's going to
Yeah.
upset me here. It's just going to be like
No.
a nice time.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, good dialogue. I suppose that's the other big hit for me, other than the crying. The good dialogue, which is increasingly hard to come by.
Yeah,
um,
it's kind of gently
in
witty, isn't it, and intelligent, and
Yeah,
yeah,
but they
and
ultimately they interact like people.
yeah, they're talking about ideas, but not in a very sledgehammer way.
Yeah,
It
it's not
comes out
too
of the
polished.
character. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. It's a fun time. It's a fun time, and
It's
it
a very
uh
literary film as well, I guess. Like maybe that's part of the draw. It's very
mm,
the writing is probably more key than the directing. I'd say
yeah,
it's more of a script than a directed film. It feels like in many
yeah.
ways.
Visually, there's not that much there.
No,
Is that
no.
it's not like, oh, what a beautiful shot, what a beautiful scene. Um, yeah, which is interesting as a visual person. But I did find choosing a film really difficult. There are films that like I love Days of Heaven. Visually,
Mm.
that is a film that knocks me out every time I see it. It's so beautiful, but it has almost no bearing on anything I've ever made. Um, yeah, like trying to think of the ways that films have influenced or even relate to my work is quite tricky. I'm more of a five part five part drama kind of person creatively, probably.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in Walking Distance, there's that kind of 70s film
Mm,
ethos is definitely in it with like Meryl Streep,
hmm
and things like that. And which, yeah, that's kind of why I wasn't sure. But when Broadcast News was made, I was thinking it was like it feels like a late 70s film rather than a late 80s
Yeah,
film in in that way.
yeah. Um, so I do love that is correct. I've literally just realised that it would have been so easy to choose one of the one of the films to reference in the book. I can't believe that didn't cross my mind. Yeah, 80s New York films mostly about women, are my favorite. Are my favorite, I think. Yeah, so anything that feels a bit like that, I'm always into.
Cool.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the song that you chose, which is "The
Mm.
Flowers" by Regina Spektor.
Yeah, this was a very difficult question.
Hmm.
Um, thank you. Really hard. Um, so I'm not like a mega Regina Spektor fan these days. I think for me, I sort of lost interest almost straight after this song. Not straight after, but so the song is Soviet Kitsch by Regina Spektor, which is on not no, it's not. The song is The Flowers by Regina Spektor, which is on Soviet Kitsch, which I guess came out in 2004 or five, or maybe. Um, uh, and I chose it. It was put on a mix CD by a friend for me. A mix CD that I listened to as I walked to the sixth form, literally every morning in a Walkman type thing. But this song, I I just hadn't heard anything like it. It's kind of got this kind of classical feeling piano. Her voice, which is very beautiful, but also has like a slightly sinister, not sinister. I don't know. It has a strange edge.
It's a bit
And then
shriller than normal, maybe, with her work,
yeah,
just kind
like
of a bit more, yeah, off. There's something off.
particularly at that point in time. So she would later become poppier, cleaner, tidier. But this Soviet kitsch, and I think the record that came before that, um, are both have odd, spiky, experimental elements in there. And at the time, so 2004, 2005, it's just about to leave school and go to uni. Like most of what I listened to was made by men. Like most of the bands I liked, things that I listened to, with the exception of PJ Harvey, I think I probably didn't really own any albums by women, which is shocking now. And I think people who are 17, 18, 19, that's not the case for people now. But at the time, if you liked guitar music and kind of the like indie rock end of things, it skewed so shockingly male, that it wouldn't have crossed my mind that everything I was listening to was made by men. And now it's obviously pivoted in the other direction, and I don't barely like men make music. Surely not. Um, but yeah, this song, like walking to school, listening to this song, and just been like, who is she? What is this? It's beautiful, but it's prickly. It's ominous. And like I love the ominousness that exists in her music. Um, I really liked uh Anoni at the time working under the name Anthony and the Johnsons. That Anthony and the Johnsons record that came out in the early 2000s. I've heard now, like there's an ominous quality to it, a strangeness that I couldn't access some part of it in my world in Plymouth in 2005. But I wanted to find it. I wanted to know what was going on. I wanted this like beautiful sadness in the way that all teenage girls want that. Um, yeah, it really was like the first time I'd heard something that was like, I don't understand and I want in. Like,
Hmm.
and it's quite a straightforward song. I'm painting it like it's bizarre, but it's not. It's lovely. Um, yeah, it was very enticing, and it was one of the first, not one of the first, but an early moment of feeling like, particularly when I was a student, when I was studying illustration, a lot of the things that I was referencing was music. And what I wanted and what I would say was like, I want to draw something that feels like this song. Um, and I think that song is like one of the first times where I was like, oh God, if I could draw something that feels like listening to this, that would be great.
Have you
I don't know,
achieved it?
obviously. No, absolutely not. But I did like for a while, I feel like the drawings that I was making were really tied to the music that I was listening to. Um, and now less so, which is a relief. It's I think it's exhausting being a fan of everything in your teens and twenties. It's
Yeah,
nice to be. I can just enjoy something at a
separate
surface level.
it.
Yeah, yeah. I'd have
Yeah,
to
no,
live it.
I think music is the thing. If you're a music person, then it goes into everything you do.
Mm,
You can do there are a few comics creators like that, but yeah, I mean you can see it with some filmmakers and stuff, and just like they're frustrated musicians in the sense they're trying to create something that a song does for them in the only way they can through their own medium. Um,
yeah,
I think that's what happens if you love music. It just it gets into everything, I guess.
totally. And I because it is the best way to communicate how you feel.
Hmm.
I think regardless of if you're not a musician, I think we'd all almost probably artists would trade it in to be musical. If I could be musical, yeah, I wouldn't I wouldn't be dicking around with drawing and writing. I'd be doing that because that cuts to it so much quicker. And there are things in books that feel like, particularly in illustrated books, I think, that feel like making music because you're sort of uh Stephen Sondheim. Um, he sometimes said something about how you've there are two things telling the story. There's the words, but you don't have to be richly descriptive in the words in a song because the description is in the way it's sung in the music. So those three things come together and make something richly descriptive, but you wouldn't put intense, flowery description in the words of the song necessarily. You might, but probably you won't because there's these other two things doing the work of telling the story. And I think that also exists in a graphic novel. And so although I put a lot of prose in my books, it's not descriptive necessarily because we've got images and color, which I suppose is like the music, the instrumentation. Uh, so that there is a link, but yeah, I'd jack it all in. And, if I could sing some songs, it would be great.
That's super interesting. I'm gonna think about that afterwards. It'll be too much to go into it here. Um, shall we talk about the comic? Yeah.
Ooh, okay, so I wish this was cooler, but it's not. It's Bunty magazine.
I think that is
Um,
cool now.
is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Is it back?
Well, I think just because now there's so much more acknowledgement of women comic creators and what they were reading when they were younger and what is driving this new narrative that's coming out of actually broadening the accessibility of comics. I think now that is, yeah, it's trendy. Yeah, to talk about this stuff. It's good.
So I didn't really read comics as a kid. I was very bookish, not a shock, but I didn't really read comics. We had an asterisk in French that I think we used to have like French exchange, like French students stay in our house. And one of them bought, uh, and I remember poring over it and reading, the three French words that I could read. Like, he said hello, and that's all I had. But I remember the women. There was a scene where there was like this queue of women, and they were all like very tiny waisted, massive boobs, like pin-up women in very skimpy clothing. And I must have been 6 or 7 looking at this, and it really felt like you feel compelled by something. And if like, I suppose you're compelled by like the potential of your future as a woman, not to be one of these doll women, but of like something you don't understand. There's some frisson of something enticing there, but there's also something insidious and gross that you don't know how to put how to put words to it. Like, this is how this world is presenting women to me, so maybe it's not for me. I don't know. I didn't have elevated enough thoughts to recognize what was happening, but there was something weird in that, so I didn't pursue that kind of comics. There was a Maid Marian. Do you remember that TV series, Maid Marian? There was
Yeah.
a Maid Marian comic that I got out of the library on a weekly basis, which I thought was wonderful. And then there was Bunty magazine, which I picked up in our local newsagents, which was called Muldoonies. And I would go there, and every 2 weeks, whatever it was, would get a copy of Bunty, which felt out of time even then in the early mid 90s. It had a ridiculous name. I knew it was dated, and stories of like schoolgirls going on adventures, and but there was also like alien stories and ghost stories, and I remember there was a series, so a story that recurred that was about a schoolgirl who was also an alien. um it was odd, but I was fascinated by it, and I liked the drawings, even though the drawings were also quite dated. They were just sort of slightly updated versions of the drawings from Bunty from the 50s, 60s, 70s. I'm sure a lot of the stories were actually probably being recycled from older issues, because no one's going to reference that. No, they're different kids reading it. Yeah, it it wasn't perfect. It wasn't really exactly to my taste. It wasn't what I know, but I really did buy it every time it was in the shop. So obviously something in it really drew me in. Um, in retrospect, oh yeah, there were stories about girls in pictures. I mean, you were a girl and you wanted that to be what you read. But at the time, it was just the best I could get. I didn't really. I did pick up like the Beano and the Dandy sometimes, but it wasn't for me. I wanted a more complicated story. And still, looking back, the drawings were still of like very pretty girls with like pert little noses and big eyes. Um, but they did feel more real. Um, yeah, I feel like I've chatted to Izzy Greenberg about Bunty. I think we've both admitted to being secret, shameful Bunty readers, because all your friends are reading like Ms. Magazine and Girl Talk, which were the girls' magazines of 1994, 5. But which I also read because I loved magazines. But you wouldn't ever tell your friends you were reading Bunty because it was called Bunty.
Why was it called Bunty?
I was, yeah, it's so 1950s, isn't it? Like that's
Mm.
not that that doesn't translate
No,
outside of that very particular moment in time.
I can
Bunty.
imagine that name being shouted across playgrounds now, though. I feel like
Yeah,
it's time for a new
it's time to
generation
bring
of
it back.
Bunties.
Oh my God. It sounds vague, obvious. It sounds kind of vaguely insulting slash
What a Bunty.
rude. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good word. And they could have just renamed it, but they couldn't because it was Bunty. Bunty.
It's a
Oh,
good
it's
brand.
awful.
Yeah, I had to Google what Bunty looked like in the 90s because obviously
Mm.
my memory, well, not my memory of Bunty, but my concept of Bunty is more the kind of newspapery comic strips
Yeah,
on the front
it
page.
was still
Whereas,
a bit newspapery.
yeah, I think it was kind of photo magazine-y a little bit as well, wasn't it?
Yeah,
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 from
yeah,
what I could tell,
100%.
the covers were much more like photos of young girls, and I think they had like photo diary stuff going on in them as well. But also,
Oh, I didn't
ma-
have
yeah,
photo
this was like
covers. They were
mid
definitely.
90s, 95,
Mhm.
96. I don't know, but I mean, I guess it made me think that you've dabbled in the teenage girl story um
Yeah,
comics arena yourself, and was
yeah.
that like a do you think that's subconscious or conscious thing that
No, because the stories in Bunty were much weirder.
yeah.
Um, but definitely the I liked the anthology feel of it.
Mm,
You know, there's 10 stories in this magazine. Each of
some
them
great
looks
people
slightly
working on them
different,
too.
yet different visual styles, different colors. But there was something compelling in that. Obviously, you're like 7, 8, 9. You're sort of peak copying, so drawing things and also sneaky illegal copying. I remember in year 5 we had to write a story, and me and my friends dared each other. This was uncharacteristically naughty for me. I was a very obedient child, and we dared each other to write a story that already existed. And I just retold a story I'd read in Bunty about a ghost marionette puppet on a boat, and carelessly my friend rewrote the episode of Friends where Ross has a baby.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, because no one saw
Yeah,
that.
because well, that it's 9 or 10 or however old we were. The thought that our 40-year-old teacher would have seen an episode of Friends was preposterous.
Was she even
Absolutely
40?
not.
Was she like 26?
Um, so we wrote this, and I got away with it, and she got caught, and she didn't throw me under the bus.
Oh, that's good of her.
So thank you, Jennifer Wilcox.
Yeah.
But yeah, she got into trouble. Well, not really into trouble. I think the note, because we were very good girls, the note in her book just said, "This is very familiar, Jennifer." Whereas my ghostly marionette slid under the radar because no one read Bunty.
Well,
So
I'm glad
yeah,
I'm glad I've drawn out Lizzy Stewart plagiarism
impression.
scandal from
Yeah,
this interview.
yeah. I'm sorry, Mrs. Dorr.
Did you do the same thing with Alison, perhaps?
Yeah, yeah, that was all a Bunty strip, just a weirdly morose Bunty strip.
Just the drawings.
But yeah, yeah,
Directly
yeah,
copied.
yeah.
Um, then we're gonna go for finally your TV show, which I've only ever seen one episode of the first one. So, but yeah, yeah,
Okay, so my choice is Girls. Um, Written and often directed by Lena Dunham, which started, I think, in 2011. It was the year I moved to London, so it'll be like 2011, 2012, maybe. Um, and uh, yeah, so there's 5, 6 series um, about a group of girls, four, four young women who are in their early 20s in New York, um, trying to live. And there've been various stages of love and hate for girls. Critically, people really celebrated it when it first came out. Then there was a real period of like condemning it for lack of diversity, for the characters being very spoiled and making bad decisions, and like, what are we trying to say about young women? And now I think it is back. I think people are younger audiences are kind of finding it, and then people of my generation, I think, are just rewatching it. I rewatch it quite often, and I think obviously the mistake that was made was thinking that she was writing this sincerely as like these people are wonderful characters who we should love and respect and admire. And obviously they weren't. They were 20-year-old, 25-year-old girls kind of muddling through and being self-absorbed and chaotic and unpleasant. And And I think what the show does really well is characters who are catastrophically flawed in many instances, but it still moves you. It still um, uh, draws you in, and you still kind of sometimes root for them. Often you don't. Um, yeah, it's like looking at it now. You're like, I can't believe she was so young when she wrote this. It's really good. It's really good. I'm coming out as a massive Girls fan. Um, it's great.
Do you think we're now, as a society, at a point where you're allowed to show flawed women characters who don't get punished for it on TV and have that be okay, or in general in culture?
Um, I think you were, I think you're always, we were always allowed to do that. Um, it's just that maybe critically, it's very easy to write about, well, this woman's a mess and she makes terrible decisions. But I think audiences always enjoyed characters who felt real and flawed and interesting, and unpleasant and funny and whatever. Like, I don't, I don't think the public was the problem. Um, yeah, and I think with girls, Hannah, the main character, but all of them are really not ideal. You don't want to spend any time with these people, but that doesn't, it doesn't make them undeserving of time. They are still people and they do interesting things, and they are awarded occasionally moments of clarity and wisdom, and oh yeah, that's a great line, or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think generally, maybe actually that's not true. I was going to say maybe we're leaning towards being hoping for less moral. I don't know, moral uh, characters that are less morally respectable. I think it would be nice to move away from thinking that in order for a character to be good, they have to be like a moral pillar of society, um, and that stories, that art isn't a document, an instructive document. It's art. It's pushing out a question into the world and saying, "What about this?" And then leaving you to discuss it. The answer is not necessarily in the work. And I think Girls was presenting loads of great questions about class and uh, privilege and uh, sexism and um, gender roles, and all of the spicy, interesting stuff that is fun to talk about. It was asking loads of really great questions about those things, and I think it probably got short shrift for a long time for not presenting a good enough answer, the right answer on those things, when actually that wasn't wasn't the plan when it was made.
I'm not going to throw a tough question at you. Looking at them all as a group, what do you think it says? What do you think they have in common?
I think it says this is a woman in her late 30s. um, this is the taste. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I'm very on the nose caricature of the kind of person that I am. I've said it yet. So you can predict my taste, I think, um, uh, quite easily. I suppose the thread is definitely, what is life like for you? Brackets, a woman. Um, yeah, I think almost exclusively. I think that applies to all of them.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is increasingly, I am just like very drawn to stories about women, I guess, muddling through and trying to find a place. And that has pushed out some other stories that now I need to know I need to bring back in. It's all gotten a bit too one note, but
Yeah, I think also you can definitely say that your love of the written word is
mhm,
and being a book person, especially when you're growing up, that there's a lot of very good writing in there, very like
mm,
literary, right? Like we said with broadcasting news, but also the Regina Spektor songs, very kind of the lyrics very
yeah,
poetic
it's
and
wordy.
yeah, yeah, and obviously Annie Ernaux,
Mm.
not Bunty, but like I mean it's
But I
the,
was
the
reading.
strong stories, like it's story based and
It is
yeah,
story based.
and then girls as well. Like from what I know, that I know the writing is very key to the whole thing.
Yeah, I watched a couple of episodes the other night and I just saw it there and was like, oh, maybe I just watched a couple of episodes of Girls. She's 25 writing this, 25, 26, 24, I can't remember, somewhere around there. And now, like when I watched it, I was the same age as Len Dunham. So it kind of just made sense very naturally to me. But now when I watch it, I'm just astounded at how well written it is. How did she come up with that? How did she know that then? Yeah, yeah. And it really changes it watching it when you're older. There's certainly you can see very clearly, like, oh, we were not meant to, we were not meant to aspire to these people at all. Mm, yeah,
Yeah, I'm gonna watch
but
it.
yeah,
I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna add
yeah,
it
give
to
it
the
a go.
list.
Yeah,
Cool.
long list.
Great. Well, Lizzy Stewart, thank you very much.